Elena Voss heard the doors of the church slam open behind her, and her heart dropped before she even turned around. She was standing at the altar in a white dress that had taken 3 fittings to get right, her hands trembling around a bouquet of white roses. The organ music had stopped. The priest had gone quiet. 200 guests sat frozen in their seats, and every single one of them was staring past her, toward the entrance, where her groom had just arrived 20 minutes late, with his tie loosened, and his eyes refusing to meet hers. Daniel Ashford walked down the aisle, like a man walking toward his own execution. Not toward his bride. Elena felt the first cold prickle of fear crawl up her spine. She had known him for 6 years. She had never seen him look at her like this, like she was a stranger, like she was an obstacle standing between him and the door. "Daniel?" she whispered, though the microphone clipped to her collar carried her voice through the entire church. "What's going on?" He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could smell the alcohol on his breath, far enough that it felt like an insult. He would not look at her eyes. He looked instead at some point over her shoulder, at the stained glass window behind the altar, as if the truth was easier to say to a piece of colored glass than to the woman he was supposed to marry. "I can't do this," he said. The words fell into the silence of the church, like stones dropped into still water. Elena felt them ripple outward through the crowd, through her chest, through the very foundation of the day she had spent a year planning. "What do you mean you can't do this?" Her voice cracked. She tried to keep it steady, tried to hold on to some shred of dignity, in front of everyone who had come to watch her get married. "Daniel, please, talk to me." "I'm sorry, Elena." He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes was not sorrow, it was relief. Relief that he was finally saying it out loud. "I don't love you. I don't think I ever did. Not the way I should have." A gasp rippled through the pews. Somewhere behind her, Elena heard her mother make a small, strangled sound. "Then why?" Elena said, her voice rising now, anger burning through the shock. "Did you propose to me? Why did you let me plan this wedding? Why did you let me stand up here in front of everyone?" Daniel's jaw tightened. For a moment, Elena thought he might actually apologize properly, might take her hand and lead her somewhere private to explain himself like a decent human being. Instead, he did something far crueler. He turned toward the second row of pews, toward the family section, and he held out his hand. "Because I'm in love with someone else," he said, "someone I should have chosen from the beginning." A woman rose from the second row. She wore a pale blue dress that Elena recognized immediately, because she had helped pick it out herself for the bridesmaids' luncheon. Her sister, Cassie Voss, walked toward Daniel with her chin lifted, refusing to meet Elena's eyes, and took his outstretched hand in front of the entire congregation. The church exploded into noise. Guests stood. Someone screamed. Elena's mother tried to push her way toward the altar, but Elena couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what her own sister had just done to her in front of everyone she had ever known. "Cassie," Elena said, and her voice came out so small, so broken, that it barely reached past the first row. "How long?" Her sister finally looked up. There was no shame in her expression, only a kind of tired defiance. "Almost a year," Cassie said. "I'm sorry, Elena. We tried to stop it, we couldn't." A year. They had been lying to her for a year, sitting across from her at family dinners, helping her pick centerpieces, smiling at her while they carried a secret that was about to burn her entire life to the ground. Elena's knees felt weak. The white roses slipped from her fingers and scattered across the altar steps. She heard her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, louder than the shouting crowd, louder than her mother's cries, louder than everything except the humiliation crushing down on her chest like a physical weight. She had worn this dress for a year in her imagination. She had dreamed about this day since she was a little girl, and now it was collapsing in front of 200 witnesses, broadcast in real time, a memory that would follow her for the rest of her life. Daniel took a step back, pulling Cassie with him, already moving toward the door, as if he could not wait to leave the wreckage he had made. "I'm sorry," he said again, though the words meant nothing now. "I never meant to hurt you like this." "Get out," Elena said. Her voice had gone flat, hollow, drained of everything except a kind of numb fury. "Both of you, get out of this church." But Daniel didn't move fast enough, because at that exact moment, the tall doors at the back of the church swung open again, and a second entrance interrupted the first. one that would change the course of Elena's entire life. A man stepped through the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees despite the summer heat outside. He was tall, taller than anyone else in the church, with dark hair and eyes the color of amber caught in firelight. He wore a black suit that fit him like it had been made for no one else, and he moved down the aisle with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once in his life questioned whether a room belonged to him. Elena had never seen him before. She was certain of that. She would have remembered a presence like his, the way conversations seemed to die as he passed, the way even Daniel, red-faced and defensive only seconds ago, suddenly went pale and quiet. "Who is that?" someone whispered from the pews, but no one had an answer. The stranger stopped at the base of the altar steps, directly between Elena and the man who had just abandoned her. His gaze moved over the scattered roses, the trembling bride, the guilty couple trying to slip away, and something in his expression sharpened, like a blade catching light. "It seems," he said, and his voice carried through the church, without any need for a microphone, deep and calm and utterly unshaken, "that I've walked in at an interesting moment." Daniel found his voice first, though it wavered. "Who are you? This is a private ceremony." The stranger did not look at Daniel. His eyes were fixed on Elena, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, as if he were reading something written beneath her skin that no one else could see. "My name is Cale," he said simply, "and you, I believe, are the reason I came here today." "I don't understand," Elena managed, wiping at her eyes, humiliation and confusion tangling together in her chest. "Do we know each other?" "Not yet," Cale said, "but we will." He turned, finally, to face Daniel, and something shifted in the air, something that made the hair on the back of Elena's neck stand up. Daniel took an involuntary step backward, pulling Cassie with him. "You were about to marry this woman," Cale said, "and you chose, in front of everyone who loves her, to humiliate her instead, to throw her away like she was nothing." His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made the entire church go silent, hanging on every word. "That was a mistake." "This is none of your business," Daniel said, though his voice shook. "It is now." Cale turned back to Elena, and slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself onto one knee at the base of the altar, right there in front of the stunned congregation, right there among the fallen white roses. He looked up at her, and for the first time since Daniel had walked through those doors, Elena felt something other than shame. She felt seen. "I don't know you," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "You will," Cale said, "Elena Voss. That man made a foolish choice today, and I do not intend to let him profit from it." He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, tall and unshaken, and turned to face the crowd, his voice ringing clear enough for every guest to hear. "Then she's mine." The church erupted into chaos. Elena's mother cried out. Guests stood, phones rising to capture the moment, whispers turning into a roar of confusion. Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but something in Cale's expression made him think better of it, and he simply stood there, frozen, his hand still tangled with Cassie's, watching his humiliated bride become the center of an entirely different storm. Elena stared at the stranger in front of her, this man who had appeared out of nowhere and claimed her in front of everyone, as if she were something precious rather than something discarded, and she did not know whether to feel afraid or grateful, perhaps both. "I don't even know your last name," she said quietly, so only he could hear. Cale's mouth curved into the faintest hint of a smile, though his eyes remained serious, almost solemn, as if he understood exactly how much her world had just been shattered and rebuilt within the space of a few minutes. "Draven," he said, "Cale Draven, and you, Elena, are about to learn that not every ending is a defeat." He offered her his hand. Around them, the chaos of the ruined wedding continued, her mother sobbing, Daniel arguing weakly with wedding guests, Cassie standing pale and silent near the door. But in that moment, none of it seemed to matter as much as the steady, unshaken hand extended toward her. Elena looked down at her torn bouquet, at the white dress she would never wear again, at the life she had planned that no longer existed. Then she looked up at the stranger who had walked into her worst moment and turned it into something else entirely. She did not know yet what she was agreeing to. She did not know that Cale Draven was not simply a wealthy stranger with impeccable timing, but the king of a hidden world of wolves and ancient bloodlines, a world that had been watching her family for longer than she could imagine. She did not know that her life was about to change in ways no wedding vow could have ever prepared her for. All she knew was that when she placed her hand in his, the shaking in her fingers finally stopped. "Come with me," Cale said quietly, "and I promise you will never stand in a room feeling small again." Elena took a breath, glanced once more at the wreckage of the wedding that had defined her entire year, at her sister's downcast eyes, at her mother's tear-streaked face, and made a decision that would rewrite the rest of her life. She walked out of that church on Cale Draven's arm, leaving her torn bouquet behind on the altar steps, leaving Daniel and Cassie to face the whispers of 200 guests alone, leaving behind the woman she had been that morning. Outside, a black car waited at the curb, sleek and unmarked, with two men standing beside it, who watched the street with the alertness of soldiers rather than chauffeurs. Elena hesitated at the top of the church steps, the summer sun blinding after the dim light of the sanctuary, and looked at Cale, with 100 questions crowding her throat. "Who are you really?" she asked. "Why did you come here? Why me?" Cale studied her for a long moment, the noise of the church still audible behind them, guests spilling out onto the steps in confused clusters. "That," he said, "is a longer story than we have time for right now. But I will tell you everything, Elena. I promise you that. Why should I trust you? I don't know anything about you." "You shouldn't," Cale admitted, and something about his honesty settled a small, strange comfort into her chest. "Not yet. But ask yourself this. Who treated you with more respect in the last 10 minutes? The man who left you standing alone in front of everyone you love, or the stranger who refused to let that be the last thing anyone remembered about today?" Elena had no answer for that. She looked back once at the church doors, half expecting Daniel to come running out after her, to apologize, to beg her to stay and sort through the wreckage together. No one came. The doors remained shut, and somewhere behind them, her old life was quietly falling apart without her. She turned back to Cale, and, for the first time since the wedding march had begun, felt something steady beneath her fear. "All right," she said. "Tell me everything, but not here." Cale nodded once, satisfied, and opened the car door for her himself, waving off the man who moved to do it for him. As Elena settled into the leather seat, the church growing smaller behind them, she caught one last glimpse of her mother standing on the steps, hand pressed to her mouth, watching her daughter disappear into a stranger's car. Elena did not know it yet, but she was leaving behind more than a ruined wedding. She was leaving behind an entire life built on assumptions, that she knew her sister, that she knew her fiancé, that she knew who she was. Within days, she would learn that even the assumptions about her own blood, her own body, her own history, were far shakier than she had ever imagined. The car pulled away from the curb, and Cale sat across from her, watching the city slide past the window with an unreadable expression. "Where are we going?" Elena finally asked, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm afternoon. "Somewhere you'll be safe," Cale said. "Somewhere no one will ever again make you feel like you don't matter." Elena wanted to laugh at the strangeness of the day, at how quickly everything had turned upside down, but the sound that came out was closer to a sob. Cale did not reach for her, did not try to comfort her with empty words. He simply sat there, steady and present, giving her the silence she needed to breathe. Somewhere behind them, in a church full of scattered white roses, her old life lay in ruins. Ahead of her, in a direction she could not yet see, an entirely new one was waiting. And Elena Voss, though she did not know it yet, had just taken the first step into a world far bigger and far stranger than anything she had ever imagined. A world where wolves wore crowns, where bloodlines carried ancient secrets, and where being chosen meant something far more permanent than any wedding vow ever could. The car merged onto the highway, leaving the city behind, and Elena closed her eyes, exhausted, humiliated, and strangely, impossibly, curious about what came next. For the first time in a year of careful planning, nothing about her future was certain. And for reasons she could not explain, that uncertainty did not frighten her nearly as much as it should have. Elena woke to sunlight pouring through a window taller than any she had ever seen in her life. For a moment, she forgot everything. She forgot the church, the torn bouquet, her sister's downcast eyes, She simply lay there, wrapped in blankets, softer than anything she owned, staring up at a ceiling, carved with patterns of leaves and wolves that seemed to shift in the morning light. Then the memory of yesterday crashed back into her all at once, and she sat up so fast her head spun. She was not in her apartment. She was not anywhere she recognized. The room around her was enormous, built of pale stone and dark wood, with a fireplace large enough to stand in, and furniture that looked older than her entire family history. Through the tall window, she could see mountains, rows of them, capped with snow despite the season, stretching toward a horizon she did not recognize. "Where am I?" she whispered to the empty room. The door opened before she could climb out of bed, and a young woman stepped inside carrying a tray of tea and fruit. She had sharp eyes, dark hair pulled back into a tight braid, and she paused in the doorway when she saw Elena was awake, dropping into a small, formal bow that startled Elena more than anything else that morning. "You're awake," the woman said. "Good." Cale was starting to worry. "Who are you? Where is he? Where am I?" The questions came out in a rush, tangled and desperate. "My name is Wren," the woman said, setting the tray down on a table near the bed. "I'm one of the king's attendants. You're in the northern stronghold, in the mountains. You've been asleep for almost a full day." "A full day?" Elena pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to steady the spinning in her head. "The king. You keep saying that word. King of what?" Wren hesitated, glancing toward the door as if unsure how much she was allowed to say. "That's not really my place to explain," she said carefully. "Cale asked to speak with you himself, as soon as you woke. Please, eat something first. You must be hungry." Elena looked down at the tray, at the delicate cup of tea and the plate of fruit arranged like something from a painting, and felt the strangeness of the entire situation settle over her like a fog. Yesterday, she had been a bride, abandoned at the altar. Today she was waking up in a stone castle in the mountains, being served tea by a woman who bowed to her like she was someone important. "I need to see him," Elena said. "Now please." Wren studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Get dressed. There are clothes in the wardrobe. I'll wait outside." The wardrobe held clothes far finer than anything Elena owned. Soft fabrics in deep colors, tailored perfectly to her size in a way that unsettled her. How had anyone known her measurements so precisely? She dressed quickly, her hands still trembling slightly, and stepped out into a long hallway lined with tall windows and old portraits of men and women with sharp, watchful eyes. Wren led her through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, past guards who stood at attention and watched Elena with open curiosity, past servants who paused their work to stare, whispering to each other the moment she passed. Elena felt the weight of their attention pressing against her skin like a physical thing. "Why is everyone looking at me like that?" she asked quietly. "Because you're the first guest the king has ever personally brought here," Wren said. "In 10 years, no one has stayed in that wing of the castle. People are curious." 10 years, Elena repeated. "What happened 10 years ago?" Wren's expression closed off slightly. That's his story to tell, not mine. They reached a set of heavy wooden doors at the end of the hallway, carved with the same wolf and leaf pattern Elena had seen on her ceiling. Wren knocked once, then pushed the doors open and stepped aside, letting Elena walk through alone. The room beyond was a study, filled with books and maps and old weapons mounted on the walls. Cale stood by the window, looking out over the mountains, his dark suit from the wedding, replaced with simpler clothes, that somehow made him look even more imposing. He turned when he heard her enter, and something in his expression softened at the sight of her. "You're awake," he said. "I was beginning to worry. You keep saying that like fainting after my wedding fell apart and being brought to some castle in the mountains is a perfectly normal reaction." Elena crossed her arms, trying to hold on to some sense of control even though her legs still felt unsteady. "Cale, I need answers, right now. Where am I? What is this place? Why did everyone at that church seem afraid of you? And why?" Her voice cracked slightly despite her efforts to sound strong. "Did you say I was yours? You don't even know me." Cale gestured toward a chair near the fireplace, and after a moment of hesitation, Elena sat, mostly because her legs seemed to need the support more than her pride wanted to admit. "What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible," he said. "I need you to listen before you decide it isn't true. Try me. Nothing about the last day has made sense so far." Cale took a slow breath, choosing his words with obvious care. There are people in this world who are not entirely human, he said. We call ourselves Lycans. We can take the shape of wolves. We live longer than ordinary humans. And we have senses and strength beyond what your kind is capable of. My family has ruled over our people for many generations. I am the current king. Elena stared at him, waiting for some sign that this was a joke, an elaborate prank, anything other than sincerity. She found none. His face remained calm, steady, utterly serious. You're telling me you turn into a wolf, she said flatly. Yes. And that everyone in this castle does too. Most of them, yes. Elena laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that came out sharper than she intended. This is insane. This is completely insane. Yesterday my fiancé left me at the altar for my sister, and today, I'm supposed to believe I've been kidnapped by a wolf king who lives in a secret castle in the mountains? You weren't kidnapped, Kale said quietly. I brought you here to keep you safe, and I intend to explain everything, including why I said what I said in that church. But first, I need you to understand something important. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level, his amber eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. The moment I saw you standing at that altar, I recognized something in you. A scent, a presence, something that told me exactly who you were before I ever heard your name. What does that mean? It means, Kale said slowly, that you are what we call a true mate. It happens perhaps once or twice in a Lycan's entire lifetime, if it happens at all. It is a bond deeper than choice, deeper than attraction. My body recognized yours the instant I walked into that church, and I could not simply stand by and watch you be humiliated by a man who never deserved you in the first place. Elena sat in silence for a long moment, trying to process what he was telling her. Everything about it should have sounded absurd, and yet, some small, quiet part of her mind kept circling back to the strange pull she had felt the moment he walked down that aisle, the way her fear had settled the instant she took his hand, the way she had followed a complete stranger out of her own wedding, without a single moment of real hesitation. I don't understand any of this, she admitted. Wolves, mates, kings. This isn't real life. It is real, Kale said gently. And I know this is overwhelming. I don't expect you to accept it all today, or even this week. But I need you to know that you are safe here, that no one in this castle will hurt you, and that I will answer any question you have, as honestly as I can. Elena studied his face, searching for deception and finding only quiet sincerity. Whatever else was happening, whatever impossible things he was claiming, one thing felt undeniably true. He was not lying to her about wanting to protect her. Why me? She finally asked. Out of everyone in the world, why is it me? Kale's expression grew thoughtful, almost troubled. That, he admitted, is a question I don't yet have a full answer to. But I intend to find out. There are things about your family, Elena, things about your blood, that I believe you don't know yourself. A chill ran down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What kind of things? Patience, Kale said, rising to his feet and offering her his hand once more. The same steady gesture from the church steps. One impossible truth at a time. For now, let me show you where you'll be staying, and let you meet the people who will be looking after you. There will be time for the rest of the story soon enough. Elena looked at his outstretched hand, remembering how it had felt to take it in that church, how the trembling in her fingers had stopped the moment she trusted him. She still had 1,000 questions, 1,000 reasons to be afraid, but something in his steady amber eyes convinced her, at least for now, to take his hand once more. All right, she said. Show me. As they walked out of the study together, Elena caught her own reflection in a tall mirror near the door, a woman in fine clothes she didn't recognize, standing beside a king she had known for less than a day, in a castle that shouldn't exist, carrying a secret about her own blood that she was only beginning to sense the weight of. Whoever she had been yesterday, standing at that altar in her wedding dress, felt like a stranger already. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the fear and the confusion, a small, curious voice was beginning to wonder who she might become next. 3 days passed before Elena felt steady enough to walk the halls of the castle on her own. She spent that time mostly in her room, sleeping more than she thought possible, eating meals brought by Ren, and staring out at the endless mountains, while she tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Sometimes she cried, quietly, when no one was watching, mourning not Daniel exactly, but the version of her life she had believed in for a year. Other times she simply sat by the window and watched the shifting light on the snow, her mind too tired to hold a single thought for long. On the fourth morning, she decided she had hidden long enough. She dressed in one of the simpler outfits from the wardrobe, a deep green dress that fit her perfectly, and stepped out into the hallway without waiting for Ren to fetch her. The castle was quieter in the early morning, sunlight slanting gold through the tall windows, and Elena walked without any particular direction, simply grateful to be moving, to be doing something other than sitting still with her thoughts. She found herself in a wide courtyard at the heart of the castle, open to the sky, with stone paths winding between old trees, and a large fountain carved in the shape of a running wolf. A woman stood near the fountain, tall and sharp-featured, dressed in dark, practical clothing that looked more suited to combat than court life. She turned as Elena approached, and her eyes narrowed with an intensity that made Elena instinctively slow her steps. "So you're the one," the woman said. "The human my brother nearly tore apart a church for." Elena stopped a few feet away, uncertain whether she had just found a friend or a threat. "You're his sister." "Ria," the woman said, offering no further explanation, studying Elena from head to toe with an expression that gave nothing away. "I've heard a great deal about you in the last few days. Most of it from Kale, who has said almost nothing useful, and some of it from the elders, who have said far too much, and none of it kind." "That's reassuring," Elena said dryly, surprising herself with how steady her voice came out. Something flickered across Ria's face, almost amusement. "You have more spine than I expected from a human who fainted after one conversation about wolves." "I didn't faint. I was exhausted and in shock. There's a difference." "Is there?" Ria's mouth curved slightly, and for the first time, some of the wariness in her posture eased. "Walk with me. If you're going to survive in this castle, you should understand what you've stumbled into, and my brother is far too careful with his words to tell you the whole truth all at once." They walked together along the stone paths, the morning air crisp and cold despite the sunlight. Ria moved with a controlled, powerful grace that reminded Elena of the way Kale carried himself, unhurried and completely certain of his place in the world. "Kale has not taken a mate in 10 years, Ria said without preamble. "Since our father died and left him the crown far too young. Most of our people believed he never would. A king without a mate is seen as unstable, incomplete, vulnerable to challenge. His refusal to choose anyone has caused no small amount of trouble among the elders." "Then why didn't he choose someone before now? Someone from your own kind, I mean." Ria's expression grew distant. "Because a chosen mate and a true mate are very different things. He could have selected a wife from any noble family in this kingdom, sealed an alliance, secured his throne. Many pressured him to. He refused every time, waiting for something he wasn't even certain existed." She glanced sideways at Elena, and then, apparently, he smelled you across a church full of humans and decided to overturn 10 years of careful restraint in a single afternoon. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, unsure whether it was embarrassment or something else entirely. "I still don't fully understand what that means. This true mate thing." "It means," Ria said, "that his instincts recognize something in your blood that goes beyond ordinary human chemistry. It happens rarely enough that some Lycans go their whole lives without experiencing it. When it does happen, the bond is nearly impossible to break, and deeply, dangerously important to our kind." "Important how?" Ria was quiet for a moment, considering how much to say. "Our people believe true mates restore balance, strengthen bloodlines. Some of the oldest stories claim that certain human families carry old blood, remnants of ancient pacts between wolves and men, and that when that blood resurfaces, it calls to us the way ours calls to yours." She shook her head slightly. "Old stories. I don't know how much of it is true. But Kale believes it, and so do the elders who oppose you being here." "Oppose me? There are people who don't want me here?" "There are people who don't want anything to threaten the order they've grown comfortable with," Ria said flatly. "A human mate, however rare the bond, upsets a great deal of careful political balance. Not everyone will welcome you as warmly as my brother has." Elena felt a fresh wave of unease settle over her. layering on top of everything else she was still struggling to process. So I'm not just adjusting to wolves and kings and mates. I'm walking into some kind of political fight I don't even understand. Welcome to court life, Rhea said, with the faintest hint of dry humor. It's rarely as simple as anyone would like. They reached a stone bench near the edge of the courtyard, and Rhea sat, gesturing for Elena to join her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, watching the wind move through the trees. Can I ask you something honestly? Elena said finally. You may. Do you think I belong here? Truthfully. Not what your brother wants to hear. Not what's politically convenient. What do you actually think? Rhea studied her for a long moment, weighing the question with the same careful intensity she seemed to bring to everything. I think, she said slowly, that my brother has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you in the 10 years since our father died. I think that means something, whether or not the old stories about bloodlines are true. And I think, she added, a faint edge returning to her voice, that you have far more courage than the elders give you credit for, walking through this courtyard alone, on your 4th day in a castle full of strangers who could tear a man apart with their bare hands. That's not exactly comforting. It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be honest. Rhea rose from the bench, brushing off her clothes with brisk efficiency. Come, there's someone else you should meet, before the elders decide to introduce themselves on their own terms. Better you hear the difficult truths from me first. Elena followed her through the courtyard and into another wing of the castle, this one older, the stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. They descended a narrow staircase into a room lined floor to ceiling, with books and scrolls, some so old the pages looked ready to crumble at the slightest touch. An elderly man sat at a long table near the center of the room, surrounded by open texts, so absorbed in his reading that he didn't notice their arrival until Rhea cleared her throat. He looked up, startled, then broke into a warm, genuine smile the moment he saw Elena. So this is her, he said, rising slowly to his feet. The one who has the entire castle whispering. Elena, this is old Bram, Rhea said, our historian and keeper of records. If anyone in this kingdom can tell you the truth about what you are, it's him. What I am? Elena repeated, unease creeping back into her voice. I'm human, that's what I am. Bram's smile softened into something more thoughtful. Perhaps, he said. Or perhaps not entirely. Sit, child. I have spent the last 3 days searching through records older than this castle itself, ever since Kale told me your family name. I believe I have found something you'll want to hear, though I suspect it will raise more questions than it answers. Elena glanced at Rhea, who nodded once, encouraging her forward, and slowly, Elena crossed the room and sat down across from the old man, her heart beginning to pound with a mixture of fear and undeniable curiosity. Tell me, she said, whatever it is, I need to know. Bram opened one of the ancient books in front of him, its pages brittle and yellowed, covered in handwriting she couldn't begin to read. The name Voss, he said quietly, is older than you realize, far older. Elena leaned forward, every nerve in her body suddenly alert, as the old historian began to speak of bloodlines and pacts made centuries before she was born, of a history that had been hiding inside her own family name her entire life, without her ever knowing it existed. Whatever she had expected when she woke up in that mountain castle 4 days ago, it had not been this. And as Bram's quiet voice filled the ancient library, Elena understood, with a growing sense of both wonder and dread, that the truth about who she really was had only just begun to unfold. The Voss family, Bram said, turning the brittle pages with careful, practiced hands, appears in our records more than 200 years ago, though I suspect the true origin goes back even further than that. Elena sat frozen, watching the old man's finger trace lines of faded ink across a page, filled with a language she didn't recognize. What kind of records? Why would my family be written about in a Lycan history book? Because your family was not always simply human, Bram said. Long ago, there existed women born into certain human bloodlines who carried a rare gift. We called them seers. They could sense truths hidden from ordinary eyes, could feel the presence of Lycan blood the way a compass feels north. Kings often sought them out, not merely as mates, but as advisors, protectors of balance between our two worlds. And you think I'm one of these seers? I think, Bram said carefully, that the blood may still exist in you, dormant, waiting. It would explain a great deal. The way Kale recognized you instantly. The strength of the pull he described. True mate bonds are rare, even among Lycans, who share blood already thick with old magic. For that bond to form so strongly, with a woman raised entirely outside our world, believing herself completely human her whole life, suggests something deeper is at work. Elena pressed her palms against the cool wood of the table, trying to steady herself against the dizziness spreading through her chest. This is insane. 2 days ago I was worried about seating charts and centerpieces. Now you're telling me I might have some kind of ancient magic sleeping inside my blood. I understand this is a great deal to accept, Bram said gently, but there are ways to test the theory, if you're willing. What kind of ways? Before Bram could answer, the library door opened, and Kale stepped inside, his expression tightening the moment he saw the ancient book open on the table, and the pale, overwhelmed look on Elena's face. Bram, he said, a note of warning in his voice. What have you told her? The truth, my king, Bram said, unbothered by the sharpness in Kale's tone. As I promised her I would. Kale crossed the room quickly and knelt beside Elena's chair, searching her face with obvious concern. Are you all right? I told him to wait until I could be here with you. I'm fine, Elena said, though her voice shook slightly. I wanted to know. I still want to know. All of it. She turned to look at him directly. Did you know about this? About the seers? About my family? Before you ever walked into that church? Kale hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything before he even spoke. I suspected, he admitted. There have been whispers about the Voss name in old records for years, faint enough that no one took them seriously. When I heard your family's name mentioned in passing months ago, I began looking into it out of simple curiosity. I did not expect to ever meet you. I certainly did not expect to feel what I felt the moment I saw you standing at that altar. So this wasn't entirely a coincidence, Elena said slowly, understanding dawning with an uncomfortable weight. You already suspected something about me before you ever set foot in that church. I suspected a name might carry old blood, Kale said. I did not know it would be you specifically, or that the bond would be this strong. Elena, please believe me. Nothing about what happened between us in that church was calculated. The moment I saw you, everything else I thought I knew fell away. That part was entirely real. Elena studied his face, searching for any hint of deception, and found only quiet, earnest honesty staring back at her. Whatever strange, impossible forces had brought them together, she believed, at least, that his reaction to her had not been some cold, calculated plan. I need time to think about all of this, she said finally. It's a lot, all of it. Of course, Kale said immediately, rising to his feet and offering his hand to help her up. Take whatever time you need. No one will pressure you into anything. As they left the library together, Bram calling out a promise to continue his research, Elena felt the weight of everything pressing down on her chest, an entire history she never knew she carried, a bond she hadn't chosen but couldn't seem to walk away from, a king who had upended his own decade of careful restraint the moment he laid eyes on her. They walked in silence through the quiet halls, morning light slanting through the tall windows, until they reached a smaller courtyard Elena hadn't seen before, surrounded by trees just beginning to show the first hints of autumn color. Can I ask you something? Elena said, breaking the silence. Anything. If I decided I wanted to leave, if all of this became too much, and I wanted to go back to my old life, back to being simply human, whatever that even means now, would you let me? Kale stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable for a long moment, before something painfully honest crossed his features. I would not stop you, he said quietly. I would never force you to stay somewhere you didn't want to be, Elena. But I would be lying if I told you it wouldn't break something in me to watch you go. That's not really an answer to whether I could go. You could go, Kale said. The doors of this castle are not locked. You are not my prisoner. But I would ask you, before you decide anything, to give yourself the chance to understand what you might be walking away from, not for my sake alone, but for your own. There are answers here about who you really are that you won't find anywhere else. Elena considered his words, watching the wind stir the leaves overhead, feeling the strange, undeniable pull she still couldn't fully explain, the the same pull that had made her take his hand in that church without hesitation, that had kept her from demanding to go home during her first confused, disoriented days in this castle. "I'm not ready to decide anything yet," she admitted. "But I'm also not ready to leave. Not until I understand more." Something in Cale's shoulders eased, though he tried not to show how much relief her words brought him. "Then let me show you something," he said. "Something I haven't shown anyone outside my own family in a very long time." He led her through a hidden passage behind the courtyard wall, down a narrow set of stairs carved directly into the mountain rock, until they emerged into a vast underground chamber, lit by strategically placed skylights. Its walls covered floor to ceiling, with paintings and carvings, depicting wolves and humans standing side by side through what looked like centuries of shared history. Elena walked slowly through the chamber, tracing her fingers over ancient depictions of women who looked remarkably similar to portraits she had seen in her own grandmother's house growing up, women with the same sharp cheekbones, the same particular tilt to their eyes that Elena saw every morning in her own mirror. "This is our history," Cale said quietly, watching her reaction. "Recorded by hands far more skilled than mine, preserved for generations, so that no one would forget how deeply our two worlds were once connected." Elena stopped in front of one particular painting, larger than the rest, depicting a woman standing beside a wolf, easily as tall as she was, both of them gazing out over a mountain landscape remarkably similar to the one visible from her own bedroom window in this very castle. Something about the image made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name, a recognition that felt older than logic could explain. "I don't understand why this feels familiar," she whispered. "I've never seen any of this before in my life." "Perhaps," Cale said softly, coming to stand beside her. "Some things are remembered by the blood, even when the mind has forgotten." Elena stood in silence, staring at the ancient painting, feeling the weight of an inheritance she had never known she carried, settling slowly, irreversibly, into place around her shoulders. Whatever choice lay ahead of her, she understood now that it was far bigger than simply choosing between two men, between two lives. It was a choice about which version of herself she was willing to become. 2 weeks passed, and slowly, Elena began to find a strange kind of rhythm inside the castle walls. She spent her mornings with Bram in the library, learning fragments of a history she had never known belonged to her, tracing her family's name back through records that stretched further into the past than she had ever imagined possible. She spent afternoons walking the courtyards with Rhea, who remained blunt and sharp-tongued, but had slowly, grudgingly, begun to treat Elena less like an intruder and more like someone worth knowing. And in the evenings, she spent time with Cale. Their conversations had grown easier over the days, though never entirely simple. He would find her after the sun had set, usually in the library or the smaller courtyard near her room, and they would talk for hours about things that had nothing to do with bloodlines or bonds or ancient prophecies. He asked about her childhood, about the small apartment she had grown up in, about the mother who worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat after Elena's father left when she was young. She asked about his own past, about the weight of becoming king at an age when most people were still finishing school, about the loneliness of ruling a kingdom without anyone beside him to share the burden. Slowly, without either of them quite naming it, something had begun to grow between them that had little to do with fate or bonds or ancient blood, and everything to do with 2 people simply choosing, night after night, to keep showing up for each other. It was on one such evening, as they sat together near the fire in the small study where she had first learned the truth about who he was, that Elena finally found the courage to ask the question that had been sitting quietly in her chest for days. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "What you did at the church, claiming me in front of everyone like that?" Cale looked up from the fire, surprised by the question. "Why would I regret it?" "Because it wasn't just about me," Elena said carefully. "It was political too, wasn't it? You said yourself that a king without a mate is seen as unstable. Maybe some part of you was relieved to finally have a reason to end that pressure, and I happened to be standing there at the right moment." Something flickered across Cale's face, not anger, but a kind of quiet hurt that surprised her. "Is that truly what you believe?" "I don't know what to believe," Elena admitted. "Everything happened so fast. I've spent every day since trying to understand which parts of this are real, and which parts are just convenient timing." Cale set down the book he had been holding and turned to face her fully, his amber eyes steady and serious in the firelight. "Let me be entirely honest with you," he said. "For 10 years, I refused every proposal my elders brought before me. I refused alliances that would have secured my throne without a single moment of hesitation, because none of those women made me feel anything beyond polite indifference. I was prepared to rule alone for the rest of my life rather than bind myself to someone I didn't truly want." "Then why me? Why did everything change so suddenly?" "Because the moment I saw you," Cale said, his voice low and unguarded in a way she hadn't heard from him before, "something in me that had been silent for 10 years finally woke up. It had nothing to do with politics, Elena. If anything, claiming a human bride created far more political trouble than it solved. Half my council still believes I've made a catastrophic mistake. Then why do it?" "Because," Horrell said simply, "watching that man throw you away in front of everyone who loved you, and doing nothing to stop it, felt like the greater mistake. I have spent 10 years being careful, calculated, patient. In that single moment, none of that mattered anymore. I only knew that I could not let you walk out of that church believing you were worth so little." Elena felt her throat tighten, tears she hadn't expected pressing suddenly behind her eyes. "No one has ever said anything like that to me before." "Then the people in your life failed to see what was standing in front of them," Cale said quietly. "I do not intend to make the same mistake." They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling softly between them, and Elena felt something shift inside her chest, some final wall she had been holding carefully in place since the moment Daniel's words shattered her wedding day. Slowly, cautiously, she reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. Cale went very still, his eyes dropping to where their hands touched, and when he looked back up at her, the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Elena," he said softly, "I need you to understand something. This bond between us, whatever ancient forces created it, does not obligate you to anything. You are not required to want me simply because some old magic decided we belong together. If your heart chooses otherwise, I will accept that, however difficult it may be." "And if my heart doesn't choose otherwise?" Elena asked quietly. Something in Cale's expression softened into something almost vulnerable, a rare crack in the composed, steady king she had come to know. "Then I would consider myself the most fortunate man alive," he said. Mate bond or not. Elena felt the warmth of his hand beneath hers, felt the steady, patient way he had waited for her to find her own answers rather than pushing her toward his, and understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever choice she made from this point forward would be entirely her own. "I'm not ready to make promises I don't fully understand yet," she said honestly. "There's still so much about this world I don't know, so much about myself I'm still learning." "I don't need promises," Cale said. "I only need honesty. And you have given me that every single day since you arrived here." Elena smiled, small and genuine, the first real smile she had felt cross her face in longer than she could remember. "Then let's keep doing that," she said, "being honest with each other, and see where it leads." Cale turned his hand beneath hers, lacing their fingers together, and for a long, quiet moment, neither of them said anything more, content simply to sit together by the fire, two people slowly, carefully, choosing each other, one honest conversation at a time. Outside the tall windows, the mountains stood silent and ancient beneath a sky full of stars, holding secrets far older than either of them fully understood yet. But inside that small study, warmed by firelight and the fragile, growing trust between them, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she cared to admit. She felt, for the first time since her wedding day collapsed around her, like she might actually be exactly where she was meant to be. The peace of that evening, however, would not last long. Because far beyond the castle walls, in halls and chambers Elena had not yet seen, other forces were already beginning to move against her, unwilling to accept a human bride, sitting so close to the throne of the Lycan kingdom. The council chamber was cold, even with a fire burning in the great hearth at its center, and Elena felt every degree of that chill the moment she stepped through its heavy doors beside Cale. She had been in the castle nearly 3 weeks, when Cale finally asked her to attend a formal council meeting, explaining gently that the elders had been requesting to see her in person, and that continuing to avoid them would only feed the whispers already spreading through the kingdom. Elena had agreed, though nothing about the long walk to the chamber, or the rows of stern, unfamiliar faces waiting inside, made her feel prepared for what came next. 7 elders sat around a long stone table, each of them dressed in dark, formal robes, their expressions ranging from cautious curiosity to open hostility. At the head of the table sat a silver-haired woman, with eyes so pale they seemed almost colorless, who watched Elena's entrance with an intensity that made her want to shrink back toward the door. "So," the woman said, before Kale had even finished guiding Elena to her seat, "this is the human who has thrown our entire court into chaos." "Elder Sable," Kale said, a note of warning clear in his voice. "We agreed to a respectful conversation." "I am being entirely respectful, my king," Sable replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I simply believe honesty is a form of respect, even when it is uncomfortable to hear." Elena straightened her spine and forced herself to meet the woman's pale gaze directly, refusing to let her fear show on her face. "I understand you have concerns," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I would rather hear them directly than have them whispered about behind my back." A flicker of surprise crossed several faces around the table, though Sable's expression remained unreadable. "Very well," she said. "My concern, simply put, is this. Our king has bound himself to a woman with no knowledge of our world, no understanding of our laws, and no proven loyalty to our people. Bloodline theories aside, she remains, for all practical purposes, an ordinary human, vulnerable to every danger our enemies might use against her, and against him through her." "With respect," Elena said, "I didn't ask to be bound to anything. Your king made that choice in front of 200 witnesses before I had said more than a few words to him." A low murmur rippled around the table, and Elena caught the faintest hint of approval in Ria's expression from where she stood near the wall, arms crossed, silently observing the proceedings. "She has a point," said an older man near the far end of the table, his voice gruff but not unkind. "It hardly seems fair to blame the woman for a decision our king made entirely on his own." "The fairness of the situation is not my concern, Halvard," Sable said sharply. "The stability of this kingdom is. A human mate creates vulnerabilities we cannot simply overlook, because our king's instincts led him somewhere inconvenient." "My instincts," Kale said, his voice cutting through the chamber with quiet authority, "have never once led this kingdom astray. I would ask that this council extend the same trust to my judgment, now that they have extended in every other matter these past 10 years. Sable's jaw tightened, though she inclined her head slightly, a reluctant concession. "I do not question your judgment out of disrespect, my king. I question it because it is my duty to consider every angle, however unwelcome. And there is another matter that troubles me even more than her vulnerability." "And that is?" Kale asked. "Magnus," Sable said, and the name seemed to settle over the room like a shadow, several elders shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "He has already heard of what happened at the church. Word travels quickly, even across kingdoms. He arrives within the week to discuss the alliance he has been proposing for the past year, and he will not be pleased to find your attention has been diverted elsewhere." Elena glanced at Kale, catching the subtle tension that crossed his features at the mention of this name. "Who is Magnus?" she asked. "The leader of the Southern Pack," Kale said carefully. "A powerful rival, and, until recently, someone I had been considering as a political ally. He proposed a marriage alliance between our territories months ago. I had not yet given him an answer. And now that answer is decided for him," Sable said, her pale eyes flicking toward Elena with unmistakable meaning. "He will not take the rejection well." A cold weight settled in Elena's stomach. She had barely begun to understand the world she had stumbled into, and already there was a rival power moving into the picture. A man whose ambitions had apparently been quietly building toward an alliance that no longer existed because of her. "What happens when he arrives?" Elena asked. "That," Kale said, his voice firm and unshaken, "is something I will handle personally. You need not worry yourself with Magnus, Elena." "With respect, my king," Sable said, "she may not have the luxury of staying uninvolved. Magnus is not known for accepting disappointment gracefully, and a human mate standing between him and an alliance he has spent months cultivating makes for a very convenient target." The chamber fell into an uneasy silence, the crackling fire the only sound for several long moments. Elena felt every pair of eyes in the room settle on her, weighing her, measuring whether she was worth the trouble her presence had apparently already caused. "I'm not going to hide," Elena said finally, surprising even herself with the steadiness in her voice. "If this Magnus arrives and there's a problem, I would rather understand what I'm facing than be kept in the dark like some fragile thing that needs protecting from the truth." Something shifted in Sable's expression, a grudging flicker of respect breaking through her guarded skepticism. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "there is more to you than I initially assumed, human or not." "That remains to be seen," Cale said, though there was warmth beneath the caution in his voice as he glanced toward Elena. "But I share the sentiment. Elena deserves to understand the full picture, not a carefully managed version of it." The council meeting continued for another hour, discussions turning toward matters of security, of how best to prepare for Magnus's arrival, of contingencies should the southern leader react with anything less than diplomacy. Elena listened carefully, absorbing every detail she could, understanding, with growing clarity, that the danger surrounding her was not some distant, abstract threat, but something arriving at this very castle within days. As the meeting finally ended and the elders filed out of the chamber, Sable lingered near the door, watching Elena with an expression that had softened only slightly from the hostility of earlier. "You handled yourself better than I expected," Sable said quietly, before Elena could respond. "Do not mistake my caution for cruelty. I have watched kingdoms fall because rulers let their hearts overrule their judgment. I simply do not wish to watch it happen here." "I understand," Elena said. "I don't want to see anyone hurt because of me either." Sable studied her for a long moment, then gave a single, measured nod before sweeping out of the chamber, leaving Elena alone, with Cale in the flickering firelight. "That went better than I expected," Cale said, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Better?" Elena repeated, raising an eyebrow. "They spent half the meeting discussing how vulnerable I am, and the other half discussing a rival leader who might want to hurt me, because his alliance fell through." "Welcome to court politics," Cale said, echoing Ria's earlier words with a faint, tired smile. "It is rarely simple, but you held your ground admirably, Elena. Sable does not offer respect easily, and you earned a measure of it today." Elena allowed herself a small breath of relief, though the weight of Magnus's impending arrival still pressed heavily against her chest. Whatever fragile peace she had begun building inside these castle walls, it was clear now that peace would not come easily, or without a fight. And somewhere south of the mountains, a rival leader was already making his way toward them, carrying with him ambitions that Elena's sudden presence had thrown dangerously off course. Magnus arrived on a gray morning, 5 days after the council meeting, with a procession of dark vehicles winding up the mountain road toward the castle gates. Elena watched from her window as the convoy pulled into the courtyard below, counting nearly a dozen figures stepping out into the cold air, all of them moving with the same controlled, predatory grace she had come to recognize in Cale and Ria. At the center of the group stood a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped dark hair and a scar running along one side of his jaw, dressed in black from head to toe, surveying the castle with an expression of open, calculating interest. "That's him," Ren said quietly, from where she stood beside Elena at the window. "Magnus, leader of the Southern Pack." "He looks exactly like I imagined," Elena murmured, watching the man's gaze sweep across the castle facade with unmistakable ambition. By the time Elena made her way down to the Great Hall an hour later, dressed in a deep burgundy gown that Ren insisted would help her stand tall among the gathered nobility, the formal greeting ceremony was already underway. Cale stood at the center of the hall, composed and regal, exchanging careful pleasantries with Magnus, while dozens of onlookers watched the exchange with poorly concealed curiosity. Elena felt every eye in the room shift toward her the moment she entered, and she forced herself to walk forward with her chin lifted, refusing to let the weight of their attention show on her face. Cale's expression eased slightly at the sight of her, though Magnus's gaze sharpened into something far more assessing. "So," Magnus said, his voice deep and smooth, carrying easily across the hall as Elena reached Cale's side. "This is the woman who has caused such interesting rumors to spread across 2 kingdoms." "Elena," Cale said, his hand finding hers with quiet reassurance. "This is Magnus, leader of the Southern Pack." "A pleasure," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite the way Magnus's dark eyes studied her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. "Is it?" Magnus asked, a faint, humorless smile touching his mouth. Forgive me if I struggle to share the sentiment. I traveled a great distance under the understanding that Kale and I would be discussing a partnership between our kingdoms. Instead, I arrived to find he has bound himself to a human bride, snatched from her own wedding no less. You must forgive my confusion. The alliance we discussed, Kale said evenly, was always contingent on mutual agreement, Magnus. I never promised you a marriage bond specifically. No, Magnus agreed, his tone deceptively pleasant. You simply allowed the assumption to stand for the better part of a year, while I turned away other offers in good faith. That is a debt, Kale, whether you intended it as one or not. The tension in the hall grew palpable, whispers rippling through the gathered nobility as they watched the exchange unfold. Elena felt Kale's hand tighten slightly around hers, though his expression remained carefully composed. Perhaps, Elena said, surprising herself as much as everyone else in the room, we could discuss this somewhere less crowded. It seems like a conversation that deserves more privacy than an audience of onlookers. Magnus's gaze flicked toward her, something like amusement flickering across his sharp features. The human speaks for herself. How refreshing. He inclined his head slightly, though the gesture felt more mocking than respectful. Very well. Perhaps a private conversation would serve us all better. They retreated to a smaller receiving room off the main hall. Kale, Elena, Magnus, and two of his attendants, along with Rhea, who positioned herself near the door, with the watchful stillness of someone prepared to intervene at the first sign of trouble. Let us speak plainly, Magnus said once the door had closed behind them. I came here prepared to discuss a marriage that would have secured peace between our territories for a generation. That opportunity has apparently vanished. What I want to understand now is what remains on the table, if anything. The alliance itself remains possible, Kale said. Trade agreements, mutual defense, shared borders. None of that requires a marriage to succeed. Perhaps not, Magnus said, his gaze sliding back toward Elena with an intensity that made her skin prickle uncomfortably. But I find myself curious about something else entirely. Tell me, Kale, does the council know the full truth about your human bride? Or only the convenient parts? Kale's expression sharpened. What are you implying? I am implying, Magnus said, that I have my own sources, and my own historians, and that the name Voss is not entirely unfamiliar to those who study old bloodlines closely. If your bride truly carries seer blood, as the rumors suggest, then she is not merely a personal choice, Kale. She is a strategic asset, one that other kingdoms might have legitimate interest in. Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine at the calculating way Magnus spoke about her, as though she were a resource to be weighed and measured, rather than a person standing directly in front of him. She is not a strategic asset, Kale said, his voice dropping into something dangerously quiet. She is my mate, Magnus. I would advise you to remember that distinction before you continue this line of conversation. Magnus held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender, though the calculating gleam in his eyes never fully faded. I meant no disrespect. I am simply pointing out that others may not share your restraint on the matter. If word of her bloodline spreads beyond this castle, and I suspect it already has, you may find more than one kingdom suddenly very interested in the woman standing beside you. The threat, thinly veiled as it was, settled heavily over the room. Elena glanced at Kale, seeing the barely restrained tension in his jaw, and understood with sudden clarity that Magnus's visit was not simply about a failed alliance. It was a warning, and possibly something more dangerous beneath the surface. Is that a threat? Rhea asked from her position near the door, her voice low and sharp. Merely an observation, Magnus said smoothly, though I would advise your king to consider his bride's safety carefully in the weeks ahead. Not every kingdom shares my restraint either. He rose from his seat, signaling to his attendants, and offered Kale a shallow, almost mocking bow. I believe our business here is concluded, for now. I will consider the trade agreements you mentioned. As for the rest, his gaze slid once more toward Elena. I suspect this will not be the last conversation we have on the matter. He left the room without further ceremony, his attendants trailing behind him, leaving a heavy, uneasy silence in his wake. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her hands trembling slightly despite her efforts to stay composed. He knows, she said quietly, about the bloodline, about everything Bram has been researching. It seems so, Kale said grimly, which means the secret is likely already spreading beyond these walls, exactly as he implied. What does that mean for us? Elena asked, fear creeping into her voice despite her best efforts to hold it back. Kale turned to face her fully, his expression a careful mix of reassurance and grim determination. It means, he said, that we no longer have the luxury of slowly uncovering the truth about your bloodline in private. If other kingdoms are already circling, we need to understand exactly what you are, and exactly what dangers that knowledge might bring, before someone else decides to act on it first. Rhea moved closer, her expression uncharacteristically serious. I'll double the guard around the castle immediately, she said, and send word to our allies to watch for any unusual movement near our borders. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, the warmth of the burgundy gown doing little to chase away the cold settling deep in her chest. Only weeks ago, her biggest worry had been seating arrangements and centerpieces. Now she stood at the center of a political storm that stretched across kingdoms she hadn't even known existed until recently. Her own blood apparently valuable enough to draw the attention of dangerous, ambitious men. I'm scared, she admitted quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Kale crossed the room and gently took her hands in his amber eyes steady and fierce with quiet promise. I will not let anyone harm you, Elena. Whatever comes next, whatever Magnus or anyone else intends, you are not facing this alone. Elena looked up at him, drawing strength from the unwavering certainty in his voice, and slowly, the trembling in her hands began to ease. Outside the castle walls, beyond the mountains and the winding roads, word of a human woman carrying ancient, valuable blood was already beginning to spread, carried by whispers and rumors into places far more dangerous than Elena could yet imagine. The quiet, careful life she had begun building inside these castle walls was about to be tested in ways she had never anticipated. The letter arrived on a rainy afternoon, 3 weeks after Magnus had departed the castle, delivered by a courier who refused to say who had sent him, before disappearing back down the mountain road. Elena sat in the library with Bram when Ren brought it to her, a simple cream envelope with her name written across the front, in handwriting she recognized instantly, handwriting that had once signed birthday cards and grocery lists during 6 years of a relationship she had thought would last forever. Daniel. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal, unfolding the single page inside, while Bram watched with quiet concern from across the table. The letter was short. Daniel wrote that he had heard rumors, impossible rumors, about wolves and kings and ancient bloodlines, and that he needed to see her, needed to understand what had truly happened that day at the church, needed to apologize properly for the way he had ended things. He asked her to meet him, alone, at a small inn at the base of the mountain, just for an hour, just to talk. Elena read the letter twice, feeling old, complicated emotions stir uncomfortably in her chest. Anger, certainly, but also a strange, unexpected pang of something almost like pity, remembering the man she had once loved, wondering what desperation had driven him to seek her out here, in a world he clearly did not understand. What is it? Bram asked gently, noticing the color drain from her face. Daniel, Elena said quietly. He wants to meet me. He says he's heard rumors about what happened, about this place, and he wants to talk. Bram's expression grew troubled. You should show this to Kale immediately. I know, Elena said, folding the letter carefully. I will. She found Kale in the training yard behind the castle, sparring with 2 of his guards, his movements fluid and precise, even as sweat dampened his dark hair. He stopped the moment he saw her expression, dismissing the guards with a quick gesture and crossing the yard to meet her. What's wrong? He asked immediately. Elena handed him the letter without a word, watching his expression darken as he read through it. He wants to meet me, she said. He says he's heard rumors. This could be nothing, Kale said slowly, though his tone suggested he didn't fully believe his own words. A former fiancé, curious and guilty, seeking closure. Or it could be something far more dangerous, especially after Magnus's visit. You think Magnus is involved? I think, Kale said carefully, that it would be foolish to assume he isn't, given the timing. If Magnus wanted information about you without revealing his own hand, using someone from your past who already knows you, who you might trust instinctively, would be a clever way to accomplish it. Elena felt sick at the thought, though some part of her resisted the idea entirely. Daniel isn't like that. He's selfish, and he hurt me terribly, but I don't believe he would work with someone dangerous just to get information. Perhaps not knowingly, Cale said. But desperate, curious men can be manipulated more easily than they realize, especially by someone as calculating as Magnus. Elena studied the letter again, torn between her instinct to trust her own read of Daniel's character and the very real danger Cale's words suggested. I want to meet him, she said finally. Not alone, obviously, but I want to understand what he knows and how he knows it. If there's a chance Magnus is using him, I'd rather find out now, while we can still control the situation. Cale's jaw tightened, clearly torn between his instinct to protect her from any possible danger and his respect for her ability to make her own decisions. If you do this, he said finally, you will not go alone. Rhea and I will be nearby, close enough to intervene the moment anything feels wrong. Agreed, Elena said. The meeting was arranged for 2 days later, at the small inn Daniel had named in his letter. Elena dressed simply for the occasion, choosing clothes that felt more like her old life than the fine gowns she had grown accustomed to wearing in the castle, and made the journey down the mountain with Cale and Rhea trailing discreetly behind, close enough to reach her within seconds if needed. Daniel was already waiting when she arrived, sitting alone at a corner table, looking thinner and more tired than she remembered, dark circles shadowing his eyes. He rose the moment he saw her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of everything unsaid between them filling the small space. You came, he said finally. I did. Elena sat across from him, keeping her posture carefully guarded. You said you wanted to talk. Daniel studied her for a long moment, something like genuine remorse crossing his features. I've heard things, Elena. About where you're staying. About who you're with. Wolves, ancient bloodlines, kings. It sounds insane, and yet I can't stop thinking about how strange that man was in the church, how everyone reacted to him. I need to know if it's true. Where did you hear these rumors? Elena asked carefully, watching his reaction closely. A man approached me, Daniel admitted, about a week after the wedding. Said his name was Silas. Said he worked for someone interested in you. Offered me money for any information I could gather about your family, your history, anything unusual you might have told me over the years. He rubbed a hand across his face, clearly troubled by his own admission. I refused him, Elena. I wanted you to know that. Whatever else I've done wrong, I wouldn't sell information about you to a stranger. Elena felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the small inn. This man, Silas, what did he look like? Daniel described him carefully, and Elena felt her stomach drop as the description matched one of the attendants who had accompanied Magnus during his visit to the castle. Confirmation, cold and certain, that Cale's suspicions had been correct. Thank you for telling me this, Elena said quietly. It matters more than you know. Are you in danger? Daniel asked, genuine concern, breaking through the awkwardness between them. Elena, whatever happened between us, whatever mistakes I made, I never wanted you to end up in actual danger. I don't know yet, Elena admitted honestly, but I appreciate you telling me the truth, rather than working with him. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history settling uncomfortably between them. I am sorry, Daniel said finally, for everything, for the way I ended things, for humiliating you in front of everyone. You deserve so much better than that. Elena studied his face, searching for the anger she had carried for weeks, and found, to her own surprise, that most of it had already faded, replaced by something closer to quiet acceptance. I forgive you, she said, and meant it. Not because what you did was right, but because holding on to that anger isn't serving me anymore. I have bigger things to worry about now. Daniel gave a small, sad smile. I suppose you do. He rose from the table, gathering his coat. Be careful, Elena. Whatever world you've stepped into, I hope it treats you better than I did. She watched him leave the inn, feeling a strange, bittersweet closure settle over the chapter of her life he represented. Moments later, Cale and Rhea appeared at her table, having watched the entire exchange from a discreet distance. Magnus, Cale said grimly, once Elena had relayed everything Daniel told her. He's moving faster than I expected. What do we do now? Elena asked. Now, Kale said, his expression hardening with quiet determination. We stop reacting to his moves and start anticipating them instead. I will not allow him to threaten you through the people from your past, or anyone else. He took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. It's time we return to the castle and prepared properly for whatever Magnus intends next. As they made their way back up the mountain road, the afternoon light beginning to fade into evening, Elena felt the weight of the coming days settling heavily around her. Whatever peace she had found within the castle walls, it was clear now that a storm was gathering just beyond them, one that would soon demand more courage from her than she had ever been asked to summon before. The castle changed after the meeting with Daniel, its quiet rhythms replaced by a constant, watchful tension that Elena felt in every corner she walked through. Guards doubled at every entrance. Rhea spent long hours in the training yard, drilling warriors with an intensity that spoke of genuine fear beneath her composed exterior. Bram buried himself deeper into the old records, searching desperately for any information that might explain exactly what kind of power Elena's bloodline carried, and why Magnus seemed so determined to understand it. Elena, for her part, refused to simply wait and worry. She spent hours with Bram, absorbing everything he could teach her about her family's history, and hours more with Rhea, who, after much insistence, finally agreed to teach her some basic self-defense, despite Elena's lack of Lycan strength or speed. You won't ever match us physically, Rhea said bluntly during one training session, guiding Elena through a defensive stance in the castle's private courtyard. But sharp instincts and quick thinking can even the odds more than you'd expect. It was during one such evening, as Elena practiced the movements Rhea had taught her, that Kale appeared at the edge of the courtyard, his expression grave enough to make Elena's stomach drop before he even spoke. Magnus has crossed into our territory, he said. Uninvited, with a force far larger than diplomatic protocol allows. He's coming here? Elena asked, her heart pounding. It appears so, Kale said. Our scouts report he's moving directly toward the castle, and he's not attempting to hide his approach. This isn't a diplomatic visit, Elena. This is a challenge. The following hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation, the entire castle mobilizing with practiced efficiency that spoke of a people who had faced conflict before and knew exactly how to answer it. Elena found herself swept into the war room, alongside Kale, Rhea, and the council elders, listening as strategies were debated and defenses were organized. What does he actually want? Elena finally asked, cutting through the tense discussion. If he wanted a war, surely he understands the cost. What is he actually hoping to gain by marching on this castle? The room fell silent for a moment, until Sable, the sharp-eyed elder who had questioned Elena so fiercely weeks before, spoke up. He wants her, she said simply, nodding toward Elena. Or rather, he wants what she represents. If Magnus can claim a seer bloodline for his own kingdom, through marriage or otherwise, he strengthens his own claim to power significantly, perhaps enough to challenge our king's authority across the wider Lycan territories. So this is about me, Elena said quietly, the weight of that realization settling heavily over her chest. This is about power, Kale corrected firmly, which Magnus is choosing to pursue through you. That is not the same as this being your fault, Elena. Do not carry guilt for another man's ambition. Despite his words, Elena felt the crushing responsibility of the situation, pressing down on her regardless. An entire kingdom preparing for potential conflict, all because a stranger had decided her blood was valuable enough to fight over. By the time evening fell, word arrived that Magnus's forces had reached the base of the mountain, setting up camp within sight of the castle's outer walls. Kale stood at the highest tower that night, watching the distant fires flicker in the darkness below, and Elena climbed the narrow stairs to join him, unable to simply wait in her room while the fate of so many hung in the balance. You should be resting, Kale said, though he made no move to send her away. I couldn't sleep even if I tried, Elena admitted, coming to stand beside him at the tower's edge. Kale, I need to ask you something honestly. If Magnus is truly here for me, would it end this faster if I simply went to him? Negotiated directly? Kale turned to her sharply, alarm flashing across his features. Absolutely not. Elena, a man like Magnus does not negotiate in good faith. If you walked into his camp, you would become a hostage within moments, a weapon he could use against everyone in this castle, myself included. Then what do we do? I can't just stand here while people prepare to fight over me. We do exactly what we've been doing, Kale said firmly. We prepare, we defend, and we make it clear that taking what belongs to this kingdom comes at a cost he isn't willing to pay. He turned to face her fully, his expression softening slightly despite the gravity of the situation. And you, Elena, stay close to those who can protect you, and trust that we will not let anything happen to you. Elena studied his face in the dim moonlight, searching for any hint of doubt beneath his steady confidence, and found only quiet, unwavering resolve. I trust you, she said softly. I just wish there was more I could do than simply wait. There is, Kale said. You can be exactly who you are. Strong, honest, unwilling to be reduced to a prize, fought over by ambitious men. That, more than any weapon, is what will carry us through whatever comes next. The following morning brought Magnus's formal challenge, delivered by messenger to the castle gates. He demanded a meeting, claiming he wished to discuss terms before any conflict began, though everyone in the castle understood the offer for what it truly was, a final attempt to seize an advantage before resorting to open confrontation. Kale agreed to meet him at the border between their territories, a neutral clearing halfway down the mountain, accompanied by Rhea, several trusted guards, and, despite considerable protest from his council, Elena herself, who refused to remain hidden away while her own fate was decided by others. The clearing was tense with silence when they arrived, Magnus and his own forces waiting on the opposite side, the air thick with barely restrained hostility. Magnus's gaze found Elena immediately, a satisfied, calculating smile spreading across his features. So the seer joins us after all, he said. How refreshing. I had wondered if your king would keep you hidden away like some fragile treasure. I am not a treasure to be hidden, Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. And I am certainly not something to be claimed by whoever decides they want me most. Magnus's smile widened slightly, though something sharper flickered behind his dark eyes. Bold words for a human standing in the middle of a Lycan territorial dispute. Perhaps, Elena said, refusing to let her voice waver. But they're true nonetheless. Whatever power you believe my bloodline holds, Magnus, it doesn't belong to you, and it never will. I chose to stay in that castle. I chose the man standing beside me. No claim you make will change that. A tense silence stretched across the clearing, Magnus's expression flickering between irritation and grudging, surprised respect. Bold, he repeated, and perhaps foolish. Do you truly believe your choice matters, standing here surrounded by armed men prepared to fight over you regardless of your wishes? I believe, Elena said. That choice is the only thing that has ever truly mattered in any of this. You came here believing you could take something by force that was never yours to take. I am telling you plainly, in front of everyone gathered in this clearing, that you were wrong. Kale stepped forward slightly, positioning himself protectively beside her, though his eyes never left Magnus's face. You have your answer, Magnus. Elena has chosen her path, freely and without coercion. I would advise you to accept that, and return to your own territory, before this confrontation becomes something neither of us can walk back from. For a long, tense moment, Magnus said nothing, his gaze shifting between Elena and Kale, weighing his options with visible calculation. Finally, something in his posture shifted, a subtle acknowledgement of the immovable resolve standing before him. This is not over, Magnus said finally, though the certainty in his voice had noticeably weakened. But perhaps today is not the day to force the matter further. He turned, gesturing to his forces to withdraw, though his final glance toward Elena carried a promise of future conflict that sent a chill down her spine, despite the apparent, temporary resolution. As Magnus's forces retreated back down the mountain, Elena felt the tension finally begin to drain from her shoulders, replaced by a shaky, overwhelming relief. Kale turned to her immediately, searching her face with obvious concern. That was incredibly brave, he said quietly. And incredibly reckless. Maybe, Elena admitted, but it worked. For now, Rhea said, coming to stand beside them, her expression still wary, despite Magnus's withdrawal. He'll return, eventually, with a stronger claim, or a larger force. Men like him rarely accept defeat gracefully. Elena knew Rhea was right, understood that today's confrontation had only delayed the larger conflict rather than resolved it entirely. But standing there in that clearing, having faced Magnus directly, and refused to be reduced to a prize claimed by force, she felt something powerful settle into place inside her chest. She was no longer the woman who had stood frozen and humiliated at her own wedding, waiting for someone else to rescue her from her circumstances. She had found her own voice, her own strength, and used it to stand her ground against a man who had believed her simply another asset to be won. Whatever came next, whatever Magnus's retreat truly meant for the future, Elena understood now that she would face it, not as a helpless bystander, but as someone who had already proven, to herself as much as anyone else, exactly how strong she had become. 3 months passed after Magnus withdrew from the mountain, 3 months in which the castle slowly returned to a fragile, watchful peace, though everyone understood the calm would not last forever. Elena used that time well. She continued her lessons with Bram, slowly piecing together a fuller picture of her family's ancient history, discovering that the seer bloodline within her carried gifts beyond simple recognition of Lycan presence. She began to sense subtle truths in conversations, small threads of honesty and deception that others missed entirely, a skill that Bram assured her would only continue to grow stronger with practice and time. She trained with Rhea as well, growing steadier and more confident with each session, no longer the trembling, uncertain woman who had first arrived at the castle in a stolen wedding dress. And she spent her evenings with Kale, their bond deepening, not through some ancient mystical pull, but through the simple, steady accumulation of honest conversations and shared trust. It was on a crisp autumn evening, nearly 6 months after that disastrous wedding day, that word finally arrived, confirming what everyone had quietly feared. Magnus was moving again, this time with a larger force, and with him, several other ambitious leaders who had been drawn by rumors of the valuable seer bloodline sitting so close to the northern throne. The battle that followed was fierce, fought across the mountain passes surrounding the castle, Kale's forces defending their territory with fierce determination, while Elena remained within the castle walls, coordinating with Bram and the remaining council members to track troop movements and identify weaknesses in the opposing forces, using the very gifts her bloodline had granted her. It was Elena, in fact, who identified the critical flaw in Magnus's strategy, sensing through careful observation and her growing intuitive gifts that his alliance with the other ambitious leaders was far more fragile than it appeared, built on mutual convenience rather than genuine loyalty. She relayed this information to Kale through careful, coded messages, and watched as he used that knowledge to drive a wedge between Magnus and his uneasy allies, turning what should have been an overwhelming force into a fractured, disorganized retreat. The final confrontation took place at the same clearing where Elena had once stood her ground against Magnus months before, though this time, the outcome was decisively different. Facing the collapse of his alliance and the loss of significant forces, Magnus had no choice but to formally withdraw his claims, accepting defeat in front of witnesses from every kingdom who had gathered to see how the conflict would resolve. "You built your entire ambition on taking something that was never yours," Kale said, standing over the defeated leader with quiet, unshaken authority. "Elena's strength defeated you as thoroughly as any army could have. Perhaps remember that the next time you consider claiming something by force rather than earning it honestly." Magnus said nothing, his pride too wounded for words, and retreated south with what remained of his forces, never to threaten the northern kingdom again. In the aftermath of the conflict, the council that had once been so wary of Elena's presence gathered to formally acknowledge what had become undeniable. Sable herself, the sharpest and most skeptical of the elders, stood before the assembled court and declared that Elena had proven herself not merely worthy of standing beside their king, but essential to the kingdom's continued strength and security. "I judged you unfairly when you first arrived," Sable admitted privately to Elena afterward, an unusual softness in her typically guarded expression. "I saw only vulnerability, where I should have looked for strength. You have my genuine respect, Elena Voss, and my apology for ever doubting you belonged here." "Thank you," Elena said, genuinely touched by the admission. "I understand your caution. I might have felt the same in your position." As winter approached, the castle prepared for a very different kind of gathering than the tense council meetings and defensive preparations that had dominated the previous months. Cale had asked Elena, formally and with obvious nervousness despite his usual composed authority, whether she would agree to a proper mating ceremony. A bond recognized not merely by ancient instinct, but chosen freely and deliberately by both of them. "I know how our story began," Cale said, kneeling before her in the same small study where they had first grown close, firelight dancing warmly across his face. "In chaos, in a church, with words spoken before we truly knew each other. I am asking you now, with full understanding of who you are and who I am, whether you would choose to stand beside me, not because ancient blood demands it, but because you want to." Elena looked down at him, remembering the humiliated, broken woman who had stood at that altar 6 months ago, and marveling at how completely her life had transformed since that devastating morning. She thought of Daniel's careless cruelty, of her sister's betrayal, of the fear and uncertainty that had marked her first days in this castle, and understood, with complete clarity, exactly how far she had traveled since then. "Yes," she said simply, joy and certainty filling her voice in equal measure. "I choose you, Cale, not because of any ancient bond, but because you have shown me, every single day since that church, exactly what it means to be truly valued." The ceremony that followed, held in the great hall of the castle, beneath banners bearing the ancient wolf crest, was attended by nobles and allies from across the northern territories, including Bram, who wept openly with pride, and Rhea, who offered Elena a rare, genuine smile as she took her place beside her brother. Elena wore a gown far different from the one she had worn at her first, disastrous wedding, deep blue and silver, chosen entirely by her own hand rather than fitted to someone else's expectations. As she walked down the aisle of the great hall toward Cale, surrounded by people who had come to genuinely respect and support her, she felt none of the anxious uncertainty that had haunted her first wedding day. She felt only quiet, powerful certainty. Cale took her hands as she reached him, his amber eyes bright with an emotion he no longer bothered to hide from anyone watching. "6 months ago," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "I made a promise in front of strangers, that this woman belonged with me. Today, I make a different promise, this time with her full and willing agreement. Elena Voss, I choose you, not as a prize claimed by fate, but as the partner I intend to stand beside for the rest of my life." "And I choose you," Elena replied, her voice steady and sure. "Not because I was rejected by someone else and had nowhere else to turn, but because you showed me, every single day, exactly what it means to be truly seen." As the ceremony concluded and the great hall erupted into celebration, Elena looked out over the gathered crowd, over the people who had once viewed her with suspicion and now offered genuine warmth, and understood fully the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived at that mountain castle 6 months ago as a broken, humiliated bride, uncertain of her place, in a world that had suddenly upended everything she believed about herself. She left that great hall as queen, not because ancient magic had decided her fate, but because she had chosen, day after day, to grow into the strength that had always existed quietly within her. Outside the castle windows, snow began to fall gently over the mountains, the same peaks that had once seemed so foreign and frightening, now feeling entirely, completely like home. Elena Voss, once left standing alone at an altar in front of 200 witnesses, now stood beside a king who had seen her worth from the very first moment, in a kingdom that had come to recognize her strength as fully as her heart had recognized her place beside him. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever ambitious rivals might yet emerge from distant kingdoms, Elena faced her future not with fear, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a woman who had already proven, beyond any doubt, exactly how far her own strength could carry her. She had been rejected once, in front of everyone she loved. She had risen from that rejection, to become someone entirely new, chosen not out of desperation or convenience, but out of genuine, hard-won love. And as the first snow of winter settled softly over her new home, Elena understood, with complete and total certainty, that she had never truly lost anything that day at the altar. She had simply been given the chance to find something far greater instead.